Great radio stations across the land, too. JoePags.com, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email, all of it and more right there. It's the Joe Pags Show. Glad to have you along for the ride. Really glad to have back in the program the senator from the great state of Texas. It, of course, is Ted Cruz. Ted, how are you?
Joe, my friend, I'm doing terrific. Thanks for having me.
It's always an absolute pleasure. Before we get into some fun stuff and then some more serious stuff again politically, let's talk about Houston for a moment. You know, they're listening on KSEV 700 AM there in Houston. And, man, what the heck is this? Depression, I guess, just sat on top of them. 40 inches of rain. Ted, some people say in their areas it looks worse than Harvey. What the heck?
Well, we've seen some significant flooding throughout Houston, throughout southeast Texas. Areas like Beaumont have gotten hit really hard. Fortunately or unfortunately, we have some local officials, city officials, county officials who've gotten an awful lot of experience dealing with flooding events and dealing with storms. And so Texas is doing what we always do in the face of disaster, which is coming together, helping each other, relying on each other. We've seen acts of heroism, just like we saw in Harvey, of first responders pulling people out of harm's way, and we're now in the process of assessing the damage and moving forward.
And you're right. The residents there immediately joined together. We always see it. Houston always leads the nation when it comes to responding to a neighbor in need. And some of the pictures we saw during Harvey showed us that exactly. And they're doing it again, getting together. And hopefully these rains will subside and the floods will subside and things can get back to normal there very quickly. It's Senator Ted Cruz. Always an absolute pleasure. Go to tedcruz.com. Is it .com or .org?
.org.
TedCruz.org. TedCruz.org. Go there right now and find out more about what this great man is doing for this state and for the country. I have to ask you up front, and my listeners and my viewers wondered if I would call you out on this. Ted, did you steal my line about Commando with Alyssa Milano? Let's just be honest here, Ted.
The greatest tribute one can play to a master is to steal their material. So I am shameless and happy to take your material.
I got to tell you, man, that was a meeting I never thought would happen. It was a meeting where you guys actually hugged it out at the end. Tell me your impression of her, because our impression of her from Twitter is there's something wrong. But always when you meet somebody face to face, that all changes. Like you and I knew each other for a long time, but then we actually sat down at the station, talked for a bit before an interview that we did, got to know each other, and then things change a little. The dynamic always changes. How different is she in real life, and did you find her reasonable at all?
Oh, look, in person, she was gracious. To be honest, you saw almost 100% of the interaction.
Yeah.
So it had. Well, and let me step back. Let me give people a little bit of backstory, because if folks are not necessarily following this real time, you may be wondering how on earth did it come to pass that I was sitting down with Alyssa Milano to begin with.
Right.
And the origin of that is a couple of weeks ago. She had sent out a tweet, and she said, "Can somebody tell me where in the Bible is a scriptural basis for a God-given right to a gun?" And I saw that tweet, and look, I could have ignored it, or I could have responded as a smart aleck.
Which I did, by the way. I said something about show me abortion in the Bible, but that's just me, Ted. You're smarter than I am when it comes to that, but go ahead.
Well, look, I decided instead I'm going to engage this on the merits and use it as an opportunity. There's such a need to reach people who aren't hearing the message through the mainstream media, and so I ended up sending what was 10 tweets.
Yeah.
That I said, look, you raised an important question and one that should be dealt with aside from the snark of Twitter.
Yeah.
And of course, the Bible doesn't talk about a modern day firearm. But what the Bible does talk about is the right to life and the right to liberty. And specifically, self-defense is referenced repeatedly in the Bible. For example, in the book of Exodus, it says if someone enters your house and seeks to, at night and seeks to do harm to your family and you take his life, that it's not murder. And actually, the next verse says if it's daytime, in other words, if it's not self-defense, then it is murder.
Right.
And that, of course, is reflected in the Declaration of Independence, the God-given inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
And that, in turn, is reflected in the Second Amendment, which is it's not about hunting, it's not about target shooting, it's about your right and my right to protect our families, our children, to protect life.
I think
we went back and forth.
Go ahead.
So I was saying we went back and forth. Actually, the whole exchange, it was Sunday afternoon, and I'm sitting there at the pool with Heidi and the girls. And they're splashing and yelling at me to jump in the pool. And Heidi's trying to talk to me. So I'm just, hold on a second. I'm going back and forth on, like, the Declaration and the Second Amendment and this Twitter storm.
And that's what we do. I mean, we end up putting our lives on hold for that. But at the end of the day, I'm glad you two had a face-to-face. I'm glad you two had a real conversation that was deeper than, as you say, the snark of Twitter, which I'm learning to get better at. And at the end of it, I think it does achieve something. I mean, you didn't change her mind. She didn't change your mind. But it achieves something that you're both human beings and that you both really do, care about kids and our safety in the future and the country. Just have very, very different ways of looking at it. I find it to be extremely hypocritical that she's always protected by good guys with guns, but can't seem to understand why we, the good guys, want to have our guns. That's always very odd to me. But when you walked away from it, did you say to yourself, that was done right? Well, I'm glad we did that.
Look, I was very happy we did it. I'll tell you, a lot of my team was nervous and concerned.
Yeah.
And we live streamed it for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of risk. It could have turned ugly. I didn't know if she was going to come in yelling and screaming and cursing. I didn't know what to expect.
Right.
But I hope that we could talk with civility, with respect, and treat each other as human beings. And I think that's what happened. And we had. You can go watch it online. We've got the whole thing live streamed for 90 minutes. And we got into real substance of, look, let's start with the premise that everyone wants to save people's lives, that nobody wants to see these horrible murders. We want to keep people safe. We want to keep our children safe. We want to keep our families safe. Let's have a conversation then about how you keep people safe.
Well, I'm glad you did.
And I tried to make the case that you do it by going after the bad guys. You do it by going after violent criminals and felons and fugitives. You don't do it by taking away the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. That doesn't work. And we had, I think, a meaty, substantive conversation, but we also treated each other with civility, and I hope it moved the ball and maybe caused some people to think in a way they wouldn't have thought, and some people to hear the message. Who wouldn't have heard it otherwise. I think all of us need to do more of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's Senator Ted Cruz, tedcruz.org. Go there right now. Follow him on all the social media. Doing great work for Texas and America. Justice Kavanaugh under fire again from a fake news report that was alleged. Well, not even alleging. It was told by a guy who is his enemy on the opposing side, on the Clinton side, of the Ken Starr report and the Ken Starr hearings, or the impeachment of Bill Clinton. This is probably a 20-some-odd year in the making vendetta this guy had. The actual alleged victim says she doesn't remember anything like that happening. It's not true, yet the media ran with it, Ted, and now they want to impeach the justice on fake news. Help me out here.
Well, Pags, it is even weaker than you described, and I got to say this assault that came in from the New York Times against Brett Kavanaugh, their hard partisanship and bias was utterly transparent, because even the guy who is claimed to have said this story, he didn't talk to the reporters. So the guy who was the Clinton lawyer didn't talk to the reporters, and they acknowledged that later.
How did they get it? How did they get it then? Where did they pull it out of the air?
It was two friends of his. So basically, here's their story. Somebody else said he saw something 30 years ago.
Wow.
And then the correction the New York Times put out later. And by the way, the woman this supposedly happened to, we never talked to because she wouldn't talk to us, and her friends say she denies it ever happened, doesn't remember it ever happened.
And that's a small piece of information you might have put in the initial report.
Look, if you were in ninth grade working on the school paper and you submitted an article like that, you get an F. You would get flunked. And look, the New York Times actually knows how to do real journalism. They just don't care. They're so consumed with partisan hatred. And I'll tell you, this is about not just Justice Kavanaugh. This is about the court as a whole. This is about wanting to intimidate Chief Justice John Roberts. This is about wanting to throw down a marker if there's another vacancy in the next year, and if President Trump gets another Supreme Court vacancy. This is all about politicizing the court and trying to intimidate the justices. And I thought it was truly disgraceful. And the partisanship from the New York Times became abundantly clear because the article was so laughably sourced on its face.
And by the way, that afternoon, CNN, MSNBC, they had experts on saying this clearly shows that Brett Kavanaugh perjured himself in the hearings in front of Congress. That's how stupid this whole thing was. He somehow perjured himself.
And a whole bunch of the 2020 Democrats said impeach the justice.
And they never retracted it.
They were in a partisan fight. That's
even when the Times retracted or added to the story and corrected it, none of those people running for office changed anything that they tweeted. They never took them down. They never apologized or rescinded. But of course, Beto, who, by the way, I didn't realize drives around in a minivan. I had no clue. He's stuck in the gravel in a minivan today, and he posted that on Instagram. Who wants a guy driving a minivan to be our president. I'm just going to put that out there. But he's going to, hell yeah, we're going to take your guns. That's what he's focused on now. So let me circle back to guns. You and Senator Grassley have made a decision to do something about it, a gun reform bill that actually is sensible. It would actually have saved a lot of lives had a move like this, a measure like this been in place when all these mass shootings happened. What would this do?
Well, Pags, you're exactly right. This is legislation I filed back in 2013, right when I was brand new in the Senate, had just been elected, and the Sandy Hook shooting happened. You remember that horrific shooting of that lunatic who killed little kids in an elementary school?
Right.
And I teamed up with Chuck Grassley, and the two of us filed legislation called Grassley-Cruz that is focused on stopping mass murders and stopping violent crime. So the way you do that is you focus on the bad guys. So number one, it strengthens the background check system. There are a whole bunch of crimes, felonies, that have never been reported to the background check database. So, for example, the Sutherland Springs shooter, it was doubly illegal for him to buy his firearm because he had a felony conviction, he had a domestic violence conviction. But the Obama administration, the Air Force, never reported his conviction to the database. So he went in to buy his gun, and because they hadn't reported the felony to the database, the background check came up clean.
And he would have been denied. He would have been denied. Period.
Yes.
End of story. Should have been.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And Grassley-Cruz mandated the Department of Justice audit every federal agency to make sure you get all those felony convictions in the database.
Yeah.
But even more importantly, it mandated the Department of Justice prosecute the felons and fugitives who try to illegally buy guns.
Right.
Lie on that form. Like the Sutherland Springs shooter, he lied on that form. Grassley-Cruz said to the Department of Justice, create a gun crime task force, bring prosecutors, and when felons and fugitives try to illegally buy guns, prosecute them. And if Grassley-Cruz, if the Democrats hadn't filibustered Grassley-Cruz in 2013, there is a very good argument that Sutherland Springs shooter would have been prosecuted and in a federal jail cell.
I agree.
Instead of in that beautiful sanctuary murdering those innocent people.
I think it happens in the
works.
It happens in the Senate. Can it happen in the House? They're not going to agree with anything Ted Cruz says, are they?
Well, when we voted on Grassley-Cruz in 2013, it got 52 votes on the floor of the Senate. And this is the Harry Reid Democratic Senate that it got 52 votes. It got 9 Democrats. It got more bipartisan support than any of the comprehensive legislation.
Right.
But the reason it didn't pass is Harry Reid and the Democrats filibustered. They insisted on 60. So even though I got a majority in a Democratic Senate, it didn't pass. Look, we need to engage and go after the criminals and put the criminals in jail before they risk lives. But sadly, the media and the 2020 Democrats, what they want to do, their objective is to go after the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, which would not prevent any of these mass murders, and they know that.
Well, guess who wouldn't turn the guns in? The criminals. I mean, hello.
That is exactly right, and we now have 3 of the 10 Democrats on that debate stage are openly advocating for gun confiscation, for the federal government confiscating your guns. That's what they're interested in. And by the way, not the criminals, as you note, Pags.
Yeah.
Not the gangbangers on the street that you look at Chicago year after year.
Would change nothing there.
It has among the highest murder rates. Why? Because the criminal they have some of the strictest gun controls in America. The law-abiding citizens follow those laws. The criminals don't.
I could be wrong, Ted, but
Democrats' plan.
It's already against the law to murder people in malice. So, I mean, the idea that that's going to change anything in the minds of a criminal is an idea that I reject completely. I'm frankly out of time. Ted, I love the work that you do for us here in Texas and for the country. Let's talk again soon, my friend.
Thanks, my friend. God bless. And try to come up with some other jokes I can steal because I'm looking for new material.
All right. Ted, we love you. I appreciate you. We're back after this on the Joe Pags Show. Stay right here.